Hello again, guys. Mr. Kinnear here with another video lesson for higher biology. We're now on to Unit 3, Sustainability and Interdependence. And today we're going to look at food supply, which is the first half of Key Area 3.1. So this is where we fit in to the whole look of the unit. So we're going to look at food supply. The second half of this key area is plant growth and productivity. We'll then look at plant and animal breeding, crop protection, and you'll see as we go through today's lesson how that then fits into what we're talking about today. We'll then go on to animal welfare, symbiosis, social behaviour, and then biodiversity, both the components of biodiversity and the threats to biodiversity. So throughout Unit 2, we're going to look at interdependence, so how organisms interact with each other. And we will start the process by looking at food supply, which is about human food supply. So how humans manage the supply of food. And obviously that is huge in terms of our survival. We need food for survival. At the moment, we have about 7.6 billion people on this planet. By 2050, we should have around about 10 billion. So that's almost a 50% increase again in the next 30 years. So with that increasing population, then there's an increasing demand for food. And obviously as well, we have this other issue is that not only do we have to have food, but we have to have the right quality of food for everyone. And we've got such a huge disparity. So if you're watching this January 2021, there's a huge amount of talk about, even just food poverty within the UK. And on the other side of that, we've also got huge stories in the news about obesity. So even just within the UK itself, we've got a massive disparity in terms of people with not enough food and people consuming too much. So that pressure is only getting bigger as the population increases. So we can put what I've just said together into this term called food security, and that's defined as the access. So both physical, so I can go to a shop in here in the UK and I have physical access to food, but also economic. Can I afford that food that I can physically access? But also, as I've just said, is it about quality and quantity of food for my survival? And we can refer to that just in a family group, a single household, a group of people, or we can talk about it as a whole population of a country. And say food security relies on the quantity, the quality, and the access for, again, people to live an active and healthy life. So that starts in terms of agriculture, vermin, if you like, in terms of production. And that starts obviously with solar radiation. So we've talked about in your third year National 5 biology, solar radiation, obviously driving the biological world because that's where we get the light energy converted into chemical energy. So food for then going up the food chain and food webs. That obviously means that food production depends on that process of photosynthesis. That's something we're going to look at in the next coming lessons. But also as well, there's 75,000 species of edible plants that humans can rely upon. That's only a small number of those plants produce about 95% of our food supply. So despite 75,000 being available to us, the majority comes from a very narrow amount of those plants. So to put that in graphical form, you can see that maize or corn, rice, wheat and potato, those first four are the biggest contributors in terms of worldwide production. That's metric tons there, and then it kind of tails off. But even then, let's say there's 75,000, and we're just looking at that graph there. It tails off by the time we get to rye. Some of those may change, and obviously things like soybean, we're using that more than maybe we did previously across the world, and it may change. But as I say, 75,000 crops edible, but that's the disparity in terms of what we actually do eat. So there are a variety of factors that affect plant growth and therefore how successful we are with our agriculture, with our growing crops for food. It starts off with the soil, so the area under crop, as in how much area do we have in our field. And again, you'll be familiar with this from previous biology discussions, that obviously to get more area for a field, you may have to cut down things like rainforest, and obviously then that has that negative impact on our environment. Fertilizers, so how much access do you have to for fertilizers, the soil type and the drainage. So again, gardeners are familiar with this as well as farmers. The type of soil that's actually there underneath your feet and how much water is retained within that soil can impact on what you can successfully grow there. Other factors in terms of crops, so what are you trying to grow? How successful is the crop that you are growing? Can you change that in any way? And again, we have found ways to do that. Pest, disease and competition, so things eating your crops, disease coming in and destroying them, and competition, which you might be a bit more familiar with if you think about weeds. So again, those things get involved in how successful we are with our crops. And again, we found a variety of different ways to manage those things and improve our plant growth. Last one, which we don't always have a control on in the open air. So temperature, rainfall, carbon dioxide levels, and light intensity. So those are all things that will obviously impact on the rate of photosynthesis. In a field, it's difficult to control that, but obviously, again, we've found different ways of doing that, polytunnels, greenhouses, etc., which we can potentially manage. That's not available, obviously, to every single person or every single farmer around the world. Just to summarise, as I was saying, if you have a limited area for growth of crops, then all you can do is improve the efficiency. And we can do that a number of ways, reducing the limiting factors. So things like polytunnels for light intensity, carbon dioxide concentration, and temperature. We could do things like higher yield crops. That could be, like we've done for millennia, selective breeding, or more readily now, our genetic modification of crops. And you could also protect crops naturally with biological controls, which we've talked about in National 5, or chemically with the likes of pesticides. All of those things have pros and cons, and obviously benefits and costs to that process. One of the other problems within this process is energy transfer. Again, we know that the source of energy is the sun. That's trapped by producers in the process of photosynthesis, and then that's passed on through food chains to various levels of consumers. But you remember from National 5 that 90% of the energy is lost at each level. So energy in undigested food and waste is lost. Energy used for movement is lost. Things like maintaining body temperature is something we talked about in the last unit, in our metabolism unit. So only 10% of the energy that this fox consumed is then incorporated into its body tissues and therefore passes on to the next trophic level. So if energy is lost at every trophic level in a food chain, it means that livestock production, so cows, pigs, etc., generate far less food per area than the plant production. I say so cereal plant, only 10% passed on to the farm animal, only 10% passed on to you. So the shorter the food chain, the more energy efficient it is. So there's a lot to be said for vegetarianism, veganism, in terms of its impact on agriculture, its impact on food production, and potentially, obviously, climate change, etc. So making that choice, it's not only a personal choice, but it can obviously contribute to better things within the world. Although arable farming does produce more food per square metre than livestock farming, it's not always that simple. Humans themselves were herders before they were farmers, so they would have livestock or cattle, whatever it was back at that time, able to move around, making the most of spontaneous plant growth, so grazing on whatever they could find moving that livestock around. And we still do have some areas unsuitable for farming, whether that's the climate, the temperatures, etc., where we just can't farm. And livestock production is still an option where crops are not. So the example in the picture, on the side of a hill or mountain, where growing crops, harvesting them, etc., would not be an option. It's just too much of an incline. Whereas obviously having grazing livestock like sheep and cattle, goats, would definitely be an option. So again, we always have to make these decisions based on the needs in terms of the food supply, and also what we can do, what we can manage within the parameters that we have available to us. So to close off this lesson, the kind of main points that we've learned today is food security. It's about that physical and economic access to food of adequate quantity and quality. So being able to access it, being able to afford it, and then not only having the quantity, but also the right quality of food. It's a challenge for many people around the world. Agriculture production impacted by a variety of things, so soil factors, crop factors, environmental factors that I went through. And again, just as we finished off with, energy loss at each trophic level, so from producer to primary consumer to secondary consumer, it does mean that arable farming can produce more food than livestock. But again, is that something that everyone wants? So we need to make sure we strike that right balance to get the right food supply. Hopefully that's been helpful and informative to you. So if I have any problems, questions or queries, let me know and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye bye.